The pre-dawn chill of Northern Virginia always carried a specific kind of stillness, the sort that settled deep into the soil of Fairfax County long before the commuter traffic choked the arteries leading into Washington, D.C. On this particular Thursday in October, the air was sharp, smelling faintly of damp hickory leaves and river mist drifting off the Potomac. It was 5:42 a.m. In the wealthy enclave of Great Falls, the world was asleep behind grand brick facades and multi-million-dollar security gates. Here, the lawns were sculpted with mathematical precision, and the silence was something people bought at a premium. For Major General Garrett Vance, this silence wasn't just a luxury, it was a psychological necessity. After 28 years in the United States Army, a career defined by 3 grueling combat tours in the sandbox, a relentless climb through the jagged landscape of the Pentagon, and his current post as the Deputy Director of Strategic Logistics for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The early morning was his only sanctuary. At 52, Vance moved with the coiled, effortless economy of a man who had never allowed his physical standards to slip. His mind operated like a supercomputer, processing global supply chains under fire, and his daily 6-mile run was the lone window where he permitted himself to untether from the crushing weight of national security. Today, he looked like any other anonymous runner fighting the autumn nip. He wore a faded, oversized heather gray sweatshirt bearing the faded crest of his alma mater, West Point, paired with black running tights and a dark fleece watch cap pulled low over his forehead. Without the 2 gleaming stars pinned to his shoulders, without the crisp, tailored lines of his dress uniform, or the formidable aura that normally commanded absolute silence in the briefing rooms of the E-Ring, he was just a man on the pavement. But to the 2 men sitting inside Fairfax County Cruiser 312, he wasn't a decorated strategist. He was a variable that didn't belong in the equation. Officer Clint Fletcher had 14 years on the force, a tenure that had slowly calcified his worldview into a permanent state of cynical suspicion. He had spent over a decade looking at the world through a windshield, letting the worst elements of human nature erode whatever idealism he might have started with. His partner, Officer Tommy Briggs, was a rookie barely 6 months out of the academy, eager, impressionable, and entirely reliant on Fletcher to teach him how the world allegedly worked outside the classroom. As the cruiser rolled down Rivercrest Drive, its headlights cutting through the low-hanging fog, Fletcher's eyes locked onto Vance's silhouette. The general was jogging at a rhythmic, unwavering pace, his footfalls steady against the asphalt. "Slow it down," Fletcher muttered, his voice flat as his hand drifted toward the center console. He tapped the brakes, causing the cruiser to match the exact stride of the runner on the sidewalk. Briggs glanced up from his mobile data terminal, blinking against the glow of the screen. "What do we got? A call come in?" "No call," Fletcher said, his eyes narrowing as he tracked the rhythmic swing of Vance's arms. "Just looking at that runner." Briggs squinted through the passenger side window. "You recognize him? Is he one of the locals?" "No," Fletcher sneered, a cold, judgmental edge creeping into his tone. "And that's the point. Look at the time, Briggs. 5:42 in the morning. Baggy hoodie, face covered up with a beanie. This isn't exactly the demographic for a Great Falls homeowner out for a casual stroll." "I don't know, Clint," Briggs offered tentatively, trying to inject a sliver of logic into his partner's sudden intensity. "We've got a dozen tech executives and defense contractors on this block. People run at weird hours, and it's freezing out. We had 3 high-end burglaries, 2 subdivisions over last week," Fletcher snapped, his ego bristling at the slight resistance. "Porch pirates and scouts dress exactly like that. They blend into the background, case the properties, and wait for the delivery trucks. You let me handle the policing, kid." Before Briggs could reply, Fletcher mashed the accelerator. The cruiser surged forward, its tires chirping against the pavement as he swung the steering wheel sharply to the right. The heavy vehicle cut across the lane, mounting the curb slightly and blocking the sidewalk directly in Vance's path. Vance's heart rate was resting at a perfectly controlled 140 beats per minute. Mentally, he was miles away, organizing a complex logistical framework for troop movements across Eastern Europe, calculating fuel consumption rates and supply depot vulnerabilities. The sudden, blinding glare of a high-intensity police spotlight shattered his focus, hitting him squarely in the eyes. Instinctively, Vance brought a hand up to shield his vision, his trail shoes skidding to a smooth halt on the damp concrete. The cruiser's suspension rocked as Fletcher threw the transmission into park. Before the engine had even settled into an idle, Fletcher's door flew open. He stepped out into the cold air, his right hand resting heavily, deliberately, on the butt of his duty weapon. "Hold it right there! Don't move!" Fletcher's command ripped through the quiet suburban morning like gunfire. Vance stood perfectly still. Decades of ironclad military discipline overrode any natural impulse to startle or react with anger. His breathing remained deep and measured. His posture automatically straightened into a rigid, commanding vertical. In a fraction of a second, his eyes scanned the environment, analyzing the threat parameters with the cold, detached precision of a commander on a hot drop zone. 2 officers, one veteran taking the lead, displaying highly aggressive, unprovoked posturing. One rookie lagging behind on the passenger side, hands hovering nervously, eyes darting. Blinding light used as a psychological disorientant. "Good morning, officers," Vance said. His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of the frantic energy Fletcher was accustomed to dealing with. "Is there a problem?" "I'm the one asking the questions here," Fletcher said, taking 2 heavy, intimidating steps forward, attempting to dominate the physical space between them. "Where are you coming from?" "My home," Vance replied, calmly gesturing with a slight nod of his head back down the tree-lined avenue. "Roughly 2.5 miles back that way. I'm finishing up my loop." "Your home?" Fletcher repeated, the word dripping with an oily, condescending disbelief. He looked Vance up and down, lingering on the faded West Point sweatshirt and the dark complexion of the man standing before him. "You're telling me you live out here? In Great Falls?" "I do. 1104 Rivercrest Drive." Fletcher let out a dry, mocking chuckle. 1104? That's a 4-acre estate, pal. That's a $4 million property. So you're standing here telling me you own that house? Vance's jaw set into a hard, unyielding line. A cold, quiet fury began to bloom in his chest, though his outward expression remained as unreadable as a marble monument. He knew precisely what this was. He had read the reports. He had counseled young, talented soldiers who had been pulled out of their vehicles and humiliated on the streets for the crime of driving while black. He had faced down foreign warlords, negotiated with hostile diplomats, and survived the meat grinder of institutional bureaucracy at the highest levels of government. To be cornered 3 blocks from the home he had earned through decades of sacrifice, blood, and unyielding service to the nation by a petty beat cop with an inferiority complex was an insult of catastrophic proportions. "I am under no obligation to justify my financial status or my housing arrangements to you, officer," Vance said, his voice dropping into a register that was quiet, firm, and lethal. "I am out for a run. I have broken no traffic or criminal laws. If you are not detaining me under reasonable suspicion of a crime, I am going to resume my workout." Vance made a deliberate movement to step around the front bumper of the cruiser. "Hey!" Fletcher barked, his face instantly turning a mottled red as his authority was challenged. "I didn't say you were dismissed. Stop right there, or I'm putting you in cuffs." The threat hung in the frigid morning air, sharp and ugly. Officer Briggs finally stepped fully out of the passenger side, his hands raised slightly in a placating gesture, his eyes darting toward the massive estates lining the street. "Clint, man, maybe we should just run the address first. Let's just—" "Shut your mouth, Briggs!" Fletcher snapped without breaking eye contact with Vance. He stepped directly into Vance's personal space, his chest puffed out. I need to see some identification, right now. Vance maintained unwavering eye contact, his gaze boring into Fletcher's eyes with a weight that would have made a colonel sweat during an inspection. I do not carry physical identification when I run. As you can see, I am wearing running tights. My house key is threaded through my shoelace, and my phone is secured in this armband. That is the extent of my property. No ID. A triumphant, ugly smirk spread across Fletcher's face. Of course, no ID, wandering around an exclusive neighborhood before sunrise, claiming you live in a mansion and you don't have a single piece of plastic to prove who you are. Turn around and put your hands on the hood of the car. Vance didn't budge an inch. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of the order vibrated through his bones, but it didn't shake his resolve. At the Pentagon, men with stars on their shoulders and medals tearing at their chests waited for his clearance before they spoke in strategic briefings. Here, a man with a badge and a high school education was treating him like a vagrant. "Officer Fletcher," Vance said, reading the name tag pinned to the man's chest. His voice carried the distinct, unmistakable timbre of a flag officer. "I am going to explain this to you exactly once. You do not possess reasonable, articulable suspicion to detaining me, let alone a lawful basis to demand identification in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is not a stop-and-identify state unless a lawful arrest is already underway. I have provided you with my address. I am going home." For a fraction of a second, Fletcher wavered. The precise, legally airtight manner in which Vance spoke, the absolute lack of fear, the rigid military bearing, sent a warning flare through his subconscious. Most people in this situation panicked, argued defensively, or became visibly agitated. This man spoke with the absolute certainty of a federal judge, but Fletcher's ego was a fragile, volatile thing. To back down now, especially in front of a rookie he was supposed to be mentoring, was unthinkable. It would mean admitting he was wrong. "Are you refusing a lawful command?" Fletcher growled, his voice dropping into a harsh, threatening register as he closed the final inches of distance. "It is not a lawful command," Vance countered calmly. Without another syllable of warning, Fletcher lunged. He grabbed Vance's left wrist, twisting it violently behind his back with a harsh, abrasive grip meant to force compliance through pain. The physical contact sent an immediate, electric jolt through Vance's nervous system. In less than a millisecond, his combat reflexes, honed by decades of elite military training, surged to the surface. His muscle memory instantly calculated the physics of the encounter. A swift pivot of his hips would throw Fletcher over his shoulder. A sharp hyperextension of the officer's elbow would shatter the joint before the rookie could even unsnap his holster. But the strategic mind of the general overrode the raw instinct of the soldier. Vance knew that if he laid a finger on the officer, the narrative would change instantly. He would become just another headline, another statistic buried under a mountain of police reports alleging assault on an officer. To win a war, one must sometimes allow the enemy to overextend their lines. He would not fight this battle on the asphalt with his fists. He would fight it with the full, devastating weight of the federal institutions he helped command. He would let them dig their own grave. Vance forced his muscles to go completely slack, offering zero physical resistance as Fletcher shoved him roughly against the freezing metal hood of the cruiser. "Whoa, Clint, take it easy," Briggs yelled, taking a step forward, his face pale under the streetlights. "There's no resistance here, man. You don't need to rough him up." "He's resisting," Fletcher lied loudly, his voice strained as he forced Vance's other arm behind his back, attempting to create a verbal record for the cruiser's dashcam. "I am completely compliant," Vance stated clearly, raising his voice just enough to ensure the audio pickup on both body cameras captured every syllable perfectly. "I am offering no resistance whatsoever. You are utilizing entirely excessive and unprovoked force." Click, click. The heavy steel cuffs ratcheted tightly around Vance's wrists, the metal biting deeply into his skin, pinching a nerve in his right forearm. Vance didn't flinch. He didn't utter a sound. He simply stared at the distortion of the flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the wet windshield of the car. "You have the right to remain silent," Fletcher muttered maliciously into Vance's ear, his breath hot and smelling of stale gas station coffee. He performed a rough, unprofessional pat-down, his hands ripping the smartphone from Vance's armband and tossing it carelessly onto the hood of the cruiser. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Just then, the heavy wooden front door of the estate across the street groaned open. Walter Gidley, a prominent corporate defense attorney who had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 20 years, walked down his driveway to retrieve the morning edition of the Wall Street Journal. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening as he took in the scene unfolding under the glare of the police spotlight. "Hey!" Gidley shouted, clutching his silk robe tightly against the chill as he jogged toward the edge of his lawn. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Fletcher didn't even turn his head. "Police business, sir. Return to your property." "That man is my neighbor," Gidley yelled back, his voice booming with the authority of a man who spent his life in federal courtrooms. "That is Garrett Vance. He lives right down the street. Unhand him immediately." Fletcher ignored the command entirely, grabbing Vance by the upper arm and dragging him away from the hood. "Get in the car," he ordered, yanking open the rear door of the cruiser. Vance turned his head slightly, his eyes locking onto Fletcher's name tag one final time. "You have just committed a catastrophic error, Officer Fletcher," he said softly, his voice chillingly calm. Yeah, tell it to the magistrate, pal," Fletcher laughed, a hollow, defensive sound as he shoved Vance into the cramped, hard plastic rear seat and slammed the heavy door shut. The interior of the cruiser smelled of industrial disinfectant, old sweat, and cheap vinyl. Vance sat perfectly upright, refusing to lean back against the plastic seat, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken or uncomfortable. With every dip and pothole the cruiser hit as it pulled away from the curb, the handcuffs dug deeper into his wrists, sending sharp, white-hot needles of pain up his arms. He ignored it, his mind already shifting into operational planning mode. Up front, the silence inside the cabin was suffocating. The tension between the two officers was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "Clint, did you hear that guy on the lawn?" Briggs asked, his voice trembling as he wrung his hands nervously. "He knew his name. He said he lives here. He's a resident." "People lie, Tommy," Fletcher dismissed with a sharp wave of his hand, though his eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror, trying to gauge Vance's expression. "Wealthy people cover for their friends, or maybe the guy's a contractor they recognize. Look at him. You think a guy dressing like that belongs in a $4 million estate? Come on, we've got him on failure to comply, suspicious activity, and resisting. It's a solid book." "We didn't even run his name," Briggs whispered, his voice rising in panic. "We didn't check his wallet because he didn't have one, but we didn't even ask him to spell it out. We didn't do a single thing by the book, Clint." "The book is a baseline, kid," Fletcher snapped, his knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. "On the street, you rely on your gut. My gut says he's a problem." In the back seat, Vance remained entirely silent. Never interrupt an enemy when he is making a mistake. The ancient maxim of military strategy, which he had taught to rooms full of rising colonels at the Army War College, applied perfectly here. Fletcher was arrogant, undisciplined, and blinded by his own systemic prejudices. He was systematically constructing his own professional execution, and Vance was more than willing to let him finish the job. The cruiser finally turned into the secure, fenced parking lot of the McLean District Station. The sky was just beginning to fracture into bruised shades of lavender and cold gray. Fletcher parked the car, walked around to the rear, and yanked the door open with an aggressive pull. "Out," he commanded. Vance stepped out onto the blacktop, his legs stiff but his movements perfectly controlled. Fletcher grabbed his arm again, marching him through the heavy security doors of the precinct like a captured prize. Even at 6:11 in the morning, the station was a hive of low-level chaos. Telephones buzzed, printers whirred, and the harsh hum of fluorescent lighting cast a sickly pall over the room. Behind the high booking counter sat Sergeant Bill Dalton, a veteran supervisor with a receding hairline and a massive mug of black coffee. "What do we have here, Fletcher?" Dalton asked without looking up from his computer screen. "Suspicious prowler, failure to identify, resisting arrest," Fletcher announced proudly, tossing Vance's encrypted smartphone onto the counter with a loud clatter. "Caught him casing estates up on Rivercrest Drive," Sergeant Dalton sighed, pulling up a digital booking sheet. He finally looked up, his eyes landing on Vance. He expected to see the usual suspects, disheveled, angry, weeping, or high. Instead, he found himself staring at a man who looked like he was presiding over a tribunal. Vance's posture was impeccably straight, his chest out, his eyes fixed on Dalton with a level of intense, analytical focus that made the sergeant's hand hesitate over his keyboard. "All right," Dalton said, his professional instincts kicking in. Something felt entirely off about the dynamic in the room. "Let's get the basics. What's your name?" "Garrett Vance," the general stated, his voice ringing clearly across the open bullpen. Several officers typing at nearby desks stopped their work, turning their heads at the sheer authority of the tone. Dalton typed the name. "Date of birth?" Vance provided it without hesitation. "Address? 1104 Rivercrest Drive, Great Falls, Virginia," Vance said evenly. Fletcher let out a loud, mocking scoff. "Yeah, right. Put him down as transient, Sarge. The guy is completely delusional. I am stating my legal primary residence for the official recorded log," Vance said, his eyes locking onto Dalton like laser sights. "I strongly advise you to ensure its accuracy." Sergeant Dalton cleared his throat, and sudden, inexplicable wave of nervousness washing over him. He looked at Vance's face, then at Fletcher's smug expression, and decided to type the address exactly as it was given. "All right, Vance, standard procedure. We need your shoelaces, your watch cap, and whatever else you have." Briggs stepped forward, his movements awkward and hesitant as he knelt to unlace Vance's trail shoes. He removed the house key from the laces and placed it into a clear plastic evidence bag. Fletcher stepped up and rudely yanked the fleece beanie off Vance's head, revealing his tightly cropped military regulation haircut. "Take him down to holding cell 3, Dalton instructed, his tone suddenly devoid of its previous routine indifference. "We'll run his prints through the live scan and see what the database says." Fletcher gripped Vance's arm once more, guiding him down a narrow concrete hallway that smelled heavily of commercial bleach and old paint. He unlocked a heavy steel door and pushed Vance inside. "Make yourself comfortable, Garrett," Fletcher sneered, slamming the heavy door shut. "You're going to be here a while." "I require my phone," Vance said calmly, standing dead center in the cell, staring through the thick glass observation window. "I am legally entitled to contact counsel or my representatives." Fletcher leaned against the doorframe outside, an arrogant smile plastered across his face. "Oh, you'll get your phone call, pal, eventually, once we're entirely done processing you. Maybe in a couple of hours, maybe after the shift change. Depends entirely on how cooperative you decide to be." Vance took a step closer to the glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his hands against the surface. But when he spoke, the sheer command in his voice caused Fletcher's smile to instantly vanish. "Officer Fletcher, you are currently violating standard department operating procedures, my constitutional rights, and multiple federal statutes. I am advising you, for the final time, to provide me with my communications device." Fletcher recovered quickly, masking his sudden internal panic with a louder bluster. "Is that a threat? You threatening a law enforcement officer?" "It is a tactical assessment," Vance replied coldly. "You have detained a United States citizen without probable cause. Give me the phone." "Sit down and shut up," Fletcher barked, striking his heavy metal flashlight against the steel frame of the door with a deafening clang before turning on his heel and storming back down the hallway. Vance stood perfectly still until the sound of Fletcher's heavy boots faded completely. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned and sat on the hard concrete bench bolted to the wall. The anger had burned away, replaced by an absolute, icy focus. He reviewed every detail of the encounter, memorizing names, badge numbers, specific timestamps, and exact phrasing. He looked down at his wrists, where deep purple indentations were already forming under the skin. He thought of his father, who had served in a segregated unit during the Korean War. He thought of the thousands of young men and women he had deployed into harm's way to protect the constitutional fabric of a nation that had just been stripped away from him by a rogue cop on a suburban street corner. They thought they had locked up a nobody, an anonymous black man they could humiliate to satisfy a petty ego. They had no idea they had just incarcerated the architect of the military's global supply network. He leaned his head against the cold concrete wall and waited. He was a master of logistics, and he was about to orchestrate the total, systemic demolition of Officer Clint Fletcher's life. All he needed was that single phone call. The McLean District Station operated on a predictable, cyclical rhythm of traffic stops, domestic disputes, and white-collar processing. Sergeant Bill Dalton knew every frequent flyer in the county, and he knew how to read the body language of someone who had just been caught red-handed. The man sitting in holding cell 3, however, was an anomaly that made every veteran nerve in his body itch with anxiety. While Vance sat in absolute silence, Dalton took the live scan fingerprint data that Briggs had nervously processed and submitted the digital file directly into the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS, syncing it simultaneously with the FBI's National Crime Information Center, NCIC, database. "Hey, Sarge," Fletcher said, strolling back to the booking desk with a fresh cup of coffee, looking thoroughly pleased with his morning's work. "The guy in 3 giving you any attitude? Usually, the ones pretending to live in Great Falls start screaming for their high-priced attorneys by now. He hasn't made a sound." Dalton didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the progress bar on his dual-monitor workstation. "Which is exactly why I ran his prints with a priority flag, Fletcher. Something about that guy doesn't fit. He didn't even flinch when you slammed him onto the hood. Normal people react. He didn't." "He's a professional," Fletcher laughed, taking a slow sip from his mug. "Trust me, probably has a sheet out of Richmond or D.C. a mile long. You'll see." The progress bar hit 100%. The monitor flickered. Instead of pulling up a standard Virginia criminal history sheet or returning a standard no record found notification, both screens instantly went completely black. A second later, a solid, blindingly bright crimson banner locked across the top of the interface. A sharp, high-pitched, digitized alert tone, a sound Dalton had never heard in his 22 years behind that desk, chirped 3 times in rapid succession. Dalton stopped breathing. The heavy ceramic mug in his hand tilted slightly, spilling scalding black coffee directly onto his knuckles, but he didn't even register the pain. He stared at the 2 words blinking in the center of the screen. "Flag officer." "Fletcher," Dalton whispered, his voice suddenly hollow and shaking. "What? He got warrants?" Fletcher asked, leaning over the counter with a smirk. "Fletcher, you colossal, unbelievable idiot," Dalton breathed, his face draining of all color until he looked like a corpse under the fluorescent lights. He pointed a trembling, coffee-stained finger at the glass screen. "Look at the monitor." Fletcher bent down, his eyes scanning the red banner. "Top secret. Department of Defense." "What the hell is this?" "It's a glitch in the software. The system is pulling up some federal employee's file by mistake." "The system doesn't make mistakes with biometric fingerprint data, Clint." Dalton suddenly exploded, his voice echoing across the entire bullpen, causing half a dozen detectives to freeze mid-sentence. Do you know what a flag officer is? It means he's an admiral or a general. You just arrested a United States general. Officer Briggs, who was sitting at a nearby desk typing out the initial arrest report, dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the linoleum floor, rolling into the corner. A general? Clint, I told you we should have run the name before we touched him. Shut up, Briggs, Fletcher snapped, though a sudden, icy bead of sweat broke out at his hairline, tracking slowly down his temple. It's a fake. It's some kind of deep cover identity theft. People use federal flags to bypass local checks all the time. There is no way in hell a guy jogging in a faded hoodie at 5 in the morning is a general at the Pentagon. Dalton ignored him completely. He violently yanked open his property drawer, grabbed the plastic evidence bag containing Vance's belongings, and ripped it open with a jagged tear. He pulled out the heavy, secure smartphone. It was a standard-issue, government-encrypted device with a biometric lock. I am personally taking this phone to him right now, Dalton said, his voice deadly quiet and serious. And you, Fletcher, are going to stand right here and pray to whatever God you believe in that he is a forgiving man. Dalton hurried down the concrete hallway, his heavy utility boots pounding against the floor. He practically threw himself against the door of holding cell 3. When he peered through the glass, he found Major General Vance sitting exactly as he had left him, perfectly still, his posture impeccably square, his eyes fixed on the door. Sir, General, Dalton stammered, his hands shaking as he unlocked the small property pass-through slot and slid the secure phone inside. Your phone call, sir. Vance stood up with an effortless, fluid grace, walked to the door, and picked up the device. Thank you, Sergeant Dalton. Am I to understand my biometric data has cleared your database? Dalton swallowed hard, his throat dry. Yes, General Vance. I want to formally apologize for the delay and the delay is the absolute least of this precinct's concerns, Sergeant, Vance said evenly, cutting him off with surgical precision. He turned his back to the window, tapped a secure 12-digit authentication code into the encrypted device, and waited as it dialed a direct line to the E-ring. The line rang exactly twice. National Military Command Center, Colonel Brooks speaking. A crisp, authoritative voice answered. Colonel, this is Major General Garrett Vance. Authentication code, Tango Whiskey 82 November. Authentication confirmed, General Vance, the officer replied instantly, his tone shifting from professional alertness to absolute deference. Go ahead, sir. Patch me through to Lieutenant General Thomas McAllister. Priority override. Immediate execution. Right away, General. There was a brief, sharp click, followed by a momentary burst of white noise. Then, a deep, gravelly voice exploded through the receiver. Garrett, it's 6:37. You're supposed to be in the secure briefing room for the Eastern Europe logistics update. Where the hell are you? Mac, we have a minor tactical disruption, Vance said, his voice completely level, completely devoid of frantic energy. I am currently locked inside holding cell 3 at the Fairfax County Police Department's McLean District Station. An absolute heavy silence hung on the encrypted line for 3 agonizing seconds. Excuse me? Lieutenant General McAllister finally said, his voice dropping into a register that signaled imminent violence. Did you just say you are in a holding cell? I was detained during my morning run outside my residence by 2 patrol officers, Vance explained calmly. Handcuffed, subjected to excessive physical force, placed in a transport vehicle, and processed. The charges, as I understand them from the booking desk, are failure to comply, suspicious activity, and resisting arrest. Are you injured, Garrett? Bruised wrists, localized nerve compression in the right arm. Nothing that compromises operational capability. But my patience is entirely depleted, Mac. I am pulling up that station's exact coordinates right now, McAllister growled, the sound of furious typing echoing in the background. They put hands on a flag officer with a level 5 strategic clearance. This is a catastrophic breach of federal security protocols. Who is the commanding officer of that precinct? I haven't met him yet. I've only interacted with the desk sergeant and the 2 arresting officers. Names are Clint Fletcher and Tommy Briggs. Garrett, sit tight. You are about to watch the entire weight of the Department of Defense descend on that building. I am personally dispatching Colonel Wyatt Stone from the Criminal Investigation Division, along with the district's federal legal counsel. They will be through those doors in less than 15 minutes. Understood, Mac. Vance out. Vance ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. He turned back toward the glass. Sergeant Dalton was still standing outside, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Sergeant, Vance said softly through the pass-through. Yes, General? I highly recommend you contact your precinct commander. He is going to want to be awake for the next hour of his life. Captain Roy Sullivan was a man who lived by the clock. He had commanded the McLean District Station for 6 years, maintaining a meticulous record of low crime rates and strict adherence to administrative protocol. At 6:52 a.m., he was standing at his kitchen island, pouring a cup of coffee, when his personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the granite counter. It wasn't the station line. It was the direct, private number of the county chief of police. Sullivan answered instantly, his posture automatically straightening. Sir, Sullivan here. Roy, what the living hell is happening in your house? The chief's voice exploded through the speaker, frantic and breathless. Sir, I'm not sure what you... I just got off the phone with the governor's office, Roy. The governor was just woken up by the Secretary of Defense. The Pentagon is frantic, the chief roared. One of your idiot road units just arrested a 2-star general, Major General Garrett Vance, the Deputy Director of Logistics for the Joint Chiefs. They cuffed him and threw him in a cage like a common thief for jogging down his own street. Sullivan's hand went weak. The ceramic mug slipped from his fingers, crashing into the sink and shattering into pieces. A general, sir? There must be a mistake. Fletcher reported a prowler. Fletcher is a dead man walking, and if you don't fix this in the next 10 minutes, you're going down with him, the chief screamed. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division is already rolling hot. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is dispatching a field team from the Washington office. The Department of Justice is already drafting federal indictments for deprivation of rights under color of law. You have exactly 10 minutes to get to your station and pray that General Vance doesn't want your building leveled. The line went dead. Sullivan didn't even bother putting on his uniform blouse. He grabbed his badge, threw on a jacket, and ran to his command vehicle. He tore down the Fairfax County Parkway at 95 miles an hour, his emergency lights clearing a path through the early commuter traffic. Back at the station, the atmosphere had shifted from early morning monotony to sheer, unadulterated terror. The legal foundation of Fletcher's arrest had utterly evaporated within minutes of a review of the code. The charge of suspicious activity for jogging in a hoodie was legally laughingstock. Exercising on a public sidewalk provided zero reasonable suspicion for a seizure. The failure to identify charge was completely invalid, as Virginia law required no such disclosure outside of a lawful arrest or a traffic stop. And the resisting arrest claim was a blatant, easily disproved fabrication, contradicted by the very compliance captured on the cruiser's own dash cam. Fletcher was pacing back and forth in the bullpen, biting down on his thumbnail until it bled. His tough guy bravado had vanished, replaced by a nauseating, hollow terror that settled deep in his stomach. Briggs was sitting at his desk, his face buried in his hands, visibly weeping. "It's a glitch," Fletcher kept repeating to anyone who passed by, his voice cracking. "It's a sophisticated federal spoof. Whoever he is, he's a sovereign citizen. They hack the databases. I did my job. I protected the neighborhood." Nobody looked at him. Nobody answered him. At exactly 7:14 a.m., the heavy glass double doors of the McLean station weren't just opened. They were shattered back against their hinges. 3 midnight black, heavily armored Chevrolet Suburbans vaulted the curb, parking directly on the concrete plaza outside the entrance. 6 men moved with military synchronization into the lobby. 4 of them were massive tactical operators in full tactical plate carriers, the bold yellow letters CID emblazoned across their chests. Leading the element was Colonel Wyatt Stone, a veteran investigator whose face looked like it had been carved out of granite. Beside him stood David Sterling, a razor-sharp federal prosecutor representing the Department of Defense. The entire bullpen went dead silent. A phone rang at an empty desk, but no one dared reach for it. Colonel Stone marched straight to the booking counter, his presence completely overwhelming the space. He looked down at Sergeant Dalton. "I am Colonel Wyatt Stone, United States Army Criminal Investigation Division. I am here to recover Major General Garrett Vance." "Where is he?" Captain Sullivan, out of breath and pale, rushed out of his back office, his civilian jacket open. "Colonel, I am Captain Sullivan, the station commander. I cannot begin to express the depth of our regret." "Save your breath for the congressional inquiry, Captain," David Sterling interrupted smoothly, stepping forward and dropping a heavy leather briefcase onto the booking counter with a resounding thud. "You are currently holding a senior military official with top secret/SCI clearance, without a warrant, without probable cause, and without lawful jurisdiction. Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1201, this legally constitutes a federal kidnapping." Sullivan's face turned the color of ash. "Kidnapping? Now, wait a minute, counselor. My officers believed—" "I don't give a damn what your officers believed," Stone roared, his voice rattling the acoustic tiles in the ceiling. "Open that cell door, right now." Fletcher, desperately clinging to the last remnants of his shattered ego, took a step forward from the bullpen. "Hey, hold on. I'm the arresting officer. He refused to show me an ID. He was prowling around a high-risk area." Colonel Stone turned his gaze to Fletcher. It was a look that had broken hardened insurgent commanders in interrogation rooms across the globe. "Are you Officer Clint Fletcher?" Yeah, I am." "You are an absolute disgrace to that badge," Stone said, his voice dropping into a lethal, quiet whisper that cut through the room like a razor. "You profiled, assaulted, and falsely imprisoned a decorated officer who has done more for the defense of this nation before sunrise than you will accomplish in your entire miserable life. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Fletcher blinked, completely stunned. "What? You can't arrest me. I'm a cop." "You're a civil rights violator who just created an international security incident," Sterling corrected coldly. "The United States Department of Justice has authorized your immediate federal detention under Title 18, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law." 2 of the massive CID tactical operators stepped forward, grabbing Fletcher by the forearms. The poetic irony of the moment was deafening. Less than 2 hours prior, Fletcher had been the one aggressively ratcheting steel cuffs onto an innocent man. Now, he was the one pinned against the desk, his arms forced behind his back as his own handcuffs were pulled from his belt and slammed around his wrists. Click, click. Briggs watched the spectacle from his desk, shaking so violently his chair rattled. When one of the CID operators glanced in his direction, the rookie immediately stood up, crossed his wrists behind his back, and surrendered without a single word. "Captain Sullivan," Stone said, his voice hollow. "Get the keys. Let's go." The procession walked down the narrow concrete hallway. Dalton, Sullivan, Stone, and Sterling approached holding cell 3. Dalton's hands were shaking so severely he dropped the master key ring twice before finally managing to guide the heavy iron key into the tumbler. The lock turned with a heavy metallic clank, and the steel door swung outward. Major General Garrett Vance was standing in the exact center of the cell. His West Point sweatshirt was damp, his running tights smudged with dust from the car hood, but his eyes were like flint. He looked at the men assembled before him. He didn't look relieved. He didn't look traumatized. He looked like a theater commander inspecting a vanguard element. "General Vance," Colonel Stone said, coming to an instantaneous, textbook-perfect salute. "Sir, we have secured the facility. Your transport is waiting outside." Vance returned the salute with flawless, crisp precision. "Thank you, Colonel." He stepped out of the cell, passing Captain Sullivan without granting the man a single glance. He walked down the concrete corridor and entered the main bullpen. As his frame cleared the doorway, every single police officer in the room, detectives, road units, and administrative staff, automatically stood up from their desks. Some did it out of sheer institutional respect. Most did it out of pure, unadulterated terror. Vance paused near the booking desk. Fletcher was standing there in handcuffs, looking completely broken, his eyes wide and unfocused as the reality of his ruined life crashed down upon him. Vance stopped. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. The silence he commanded was infinitely more devastating than any insult he could have hurled. "I told you, Officer Fletcher," Vance said softly, his voice carrying into every quiet corner of the room. "You were making a catastrophic error." He turned, walking through the shattered glass doors into the bright morning sun, leaving the burning wreckage of Fletcher's career behind him. The silence that General Garrett Vance left in his wake at the McLean District Station was not peaceful. It was the suffocating, heavy pressure that follows a detonation in a confined space. Through the windows, the remaining staff watched the 3 black Suburbans merge seamlessly into the morning traffic, disappearing down the parkway toward the Pentagon. They had taken the general. They had left a catastrophe. Captain Roy Sullivan stood frozen in the center of the bullpen, his life's work unraveling in real time. "Captain," Sergeant Dalton croaked from behind the desk, his voice thin. "What do we do now?" Before Sullivan could formulate a response, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. These weren't county sirens. Within moments, 4 dark blue Ford Explorers swerved into the station's parking lot, effectively boxing in the county cruiser fleet. The doors flew open, and a dozen agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in gold across the back swarmed the entrance. Leading the team was Special Agent in Charge Evelyn Carter, a legendary investigator from the Civil Rights Division. She marched into the lobby, flanked by 2 armed agents carrying empty file boxes. She locked eyes with Sullivan. "Captain Roy Sullivan?" Carter asked, flashing a gold federal credential. "Yes, Agent, Special Agent Carter, FBI. We are officially executing a federal warrant to seize this facility's network servers, dispatch logs, and all body-worn camera footage pending a full investigation into systemic civil rights abuses," she announced. "As of this moment, every officer on duty during the unlawful detention of Major General Vance is confined to this station pending formal federal interrogation." "Agent, please," Sullivan pleaded, his hands raised. This was the isolated action of a rogue veteran officer, Clint Fletcher. "He's already in federal custody with CID. My department—" "Save the speech for the federal grand jury, Captain," Carter interrupted coldly. "The Department of Justice doesn't believe in lone wolves when it comes to a culture of institutional profiling. We are freezing all federal grants to this district effective immediately. I want the keys to Fletcher's locker, his vehicle, and access to your server room now." While the FBI systematically dismantled the McLean station, Officer Clint Fletcher was introduced to a terrifying new reality. He was placed in a sterile, windowless interrogation room at the FBI field office in Baltimore. The handcuffs had been removed, but the heavy steel door was locked from the outside. He sat at the metal table, his hands shaking so violently he had to tuck them into his armpits to conceal the tremors. The latch clicked. David Sterling, the Pentagon's federal counsel, walked in alongside Special Agent Carter. They didn't sit down. They loomed over him. "Officer Fletcher," Sterling began, his voice smooth but laced with legal venom. "Do you fully comprehend the severity of the federal statutes you violated this morning?" "I made a mistake," Fletcher blurted out, his voice a high-pitched whine. It was dark. He looked suspicious. I was just doing my job, trying to keep the neighborhood safe. Safe from what exactly? Agent Carter asked, dropping a thick manila folder onto the metal table with a resounding slam. Safe from black homeowners who own property worth more than you'll earn in 3 lifetimes? That's not what this was, Fletcher protested, his face turning a deep crimson. We seized your personal cell phone, Clint, Carter said smoothly, opening the folder and sliding a printed sheet of text logs across the table. You thought using an encrypted messaging application protected you. It didn't. Let's look at the log from 5:21 a.m. today. A message from Charles Higgins, the vice president of the Rivercrest Homeowners Association, sent directly to you. Fletcher's breath hitched. His eyes locked onto the printed page. Higgins, 5:21 a.m. That new guy at 1104 is out running again. He's dragging down the community aesthetic just by being here. Give him a shake, Clint. Let him know this isn't his kind of town. Fletcher, 5:24 a.m. Copy that, Charles. I'll make sure he gets the message loud and clear. Might even give him a free ride to the station to think about it. The room went completely dead silent. The faint hum of the HVAC system sounded like a jet engine in Fletcher's ears. This wasn't a mistake, Officer Fletcher, Sterling said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. This was a premeditated conspiracy to deprive a United States citizen of his constitutional rights under color of law, a direct violation of Title 18, U.S. Code, Sections 241 and 242. You colluded with a civilian to execute a campaign of racial intimidation against a flag officer of the armed forces. I can explain, Fletcher choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelids. Higgins, Charles promised he'd secure a private security consultation contract for my firm when I retired. I didn't know he was a general. I swear to God I didn't know. It wouldn't matter if he was a line cook at a diner, Carter snapped, disgust evident in her posture. The law applies to everyone, but because he is a general, you have brought the unmitigated wrath of the federal government down on your head. Your rookie partner, Briggs? He's currently signing like a bird in the next room, detailing every single policy violation you forced him to overlook for the last 6 months in exchange for immunity. He's testifying against you, Clint. Fletcher slumped forward, his forehead hitting the cold metal of the table as he let out a broken, defeated sob. His career was finished. His freedom was gone. His life was effectively over. Meanwhile, within the high-security corridors of the Pentagon, Major General Garrett Vance was not weeping. He was working. Cleared by the military medical team, his bruised wrists photographed and cataloged as evidence for the Department of Justice, he had changed into a fresh, impeccably tailored Class A uniform. The 2 silver stars on his shoulders gleamed under the overhead lights as he walked into the secure briefing room of Lieutenant General Thomas McAllister. Garrett, McAllister said, rising from his heavy desk. I just reviewed the preliminary DOJ brief. It's disgusting. Premeditated racial targeting. I read it, Mac, Vance replied calmly, taking a seat. It's a symptom of a larger disease. The arrogance of unchecked authority always breeds this kind of institutional rot. The Attorney General is personally handling the prosecution, McAllister assured him. Fletcher is looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Higgins, the HOA executive, was picked up by the Bureau 40 minutes ago. And Sullivan is being forced into immediate administrative resignation. Vance nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. That addresses the immediate individuals, Mac, but it doesn't solve the structural problem. What are you proposing? The McLean District Station is heavily militarized, Vance said, leaning forward. When I was processed through that facility, I conducted a baseline logistical inventory of their visible assets. They possess surplus M4 carbines, military-grade body armor, and according to county records, they acquired 2 MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, through the Department of Defense's 1033 surplus program last year. McAllister frowned. That's standard baseline procurement for large suburban departments these days. A department that fosters an environment where officers feel comfortable hunting minorities as a favor to a wealthy HOA board member has no business wielding weapons of war, Vance stated with absolute finality. They lack the discipline, the federal oversight, and the moral compass required to manage that tier of equipment. If they treat a civilian jogger like an insurgent combatant, what do you think they will do with an MRAP during a peaceful assembly? McAllister rubbed his chin, a slight smile breaking through his stern expression. You want to strip their inventory. I want to strip them down to the bare concrete, Vance corrected coldly. I am submitting a formal operational recommendation to the Defense Logistics Agency to immediately recall every piece of military-grade surplus equipment from that district, citing severe breaches of constitutional protocol. Furthermore, I am requesting a comprehensive nationwide audit of the entire 1033 program. If local police departments want to play soldier, they can be held to the standard of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Since they aren't, they lose the gear. McAllister looked at the brilliant tactician sitting across from him. Fletcher hadn't just arrested a citizen, he had arrested a master of asymmetric warfare who knew exactly how to dismantle the system that protected him. Draft the directive, General Vance, McAllister said. You have my full authorization. 9 months later, the oppressive heat of the Virginia summer baked the granite steps of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The media circus that had surrounded the Vance case had reached its absolute peak. Inside the packed courtroom, the air conditioning hummed, but the atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Judge Preston Brooks looked down from his elevated bench, his expression unreadable. At the defense table sat Clint Fletcher. He looked like he had aged a decade in less than a year. Stripped of his uniform, his badge, and his arrogant swagger, he looked incredibly small in a poorly tailored gray suit. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes glued to the polished wood of the table. Across the aisle sat David Sterling and a team of senior civil rights prosecutors. In the second row of the gallery, sitting perfectly upright in his full dress uniform, was Major General Garrett Vance. He had declined to submit a victim impact statement. He didn't consider himself a victim. He was the catalyst for a necessary correction. Mr. Fletcher, please stand, Judge Brooks's voice boomed through the chamber, instantly silencing the gallery. Fletcher rose, his knees visibly shaking as his attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Clint Fletcher, a federal jury of your peers has found you guilty of conspiracy against civil rights and deprivation of rights under color of law, Judge Brooks began, adjusting his glasses. In my 30 years on the federal bench, I have rarely witnessed such a blatant, cowardly abuse of public trust. You were issued a badge and a firearm to protect your community. Instead, you weaponized that authority to act as a hired mercenary for a bigoted neighborhood dispute. You targeted a decorated military officer simply because you believed his skin color meant he hadn't earned his place in a neighborhood he bought with decades of service to this nation. Fletcher closed his eyes, a single tear cutting through the sweat on his cheek. Your actions have not only shattered your own life, but they have cast a deep, shameful shadow over every honorable law enforcement officer who wears the uniform with integrity, the judge continued, his tone rising with controlled fury. Because of your malice, the McLean district is now under a strict federal consent decree, completely stripped of its tactical military assets and federal funding. You have disgraced your department, your state, and yourself. It is the sentence of this court that you, Clint Fletcher, be remanded to the custody of the Bureau of Prisons for a term of 144 months, 12 years, without the possibility of parole. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Fletcher's knees gave out completely, and his attorney had to catch his arm to keep him from collapsing to the carpet. 12 years in a federal penitentiary as a former cop was a fate worse than death. Furthermore, Judge Brooks added, striking his gavel down with a sharp, definitive crack, you are permanently stripped of all law enforcement certifications nationwide, and your municipal pension is hereby forfeited in its entirety. Court is adjourned. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and federal marshals stepped forward, immediately securing Fletcher's arms. As they turned him to lead him through the side door, his eyes briefly met Vance's in the gallery. The general did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply offered a cold, definitive nod of acknowledgement. The campaign was over, and the victory was absolute. A week later, the crisp autumn air had returned to Great Falls. The massive oaks lining the avenues were turning brilliant shades of crimson and gold, and a light mist hung low over the manicured lawns. At 5:42 a.m., the neighborhood was completely still. Major General Garrett Vance stepped out of the front door of 1104 Rivercrest Drive. He wore his faded West Point sweatshirt, his black running tights, and his dark watch cap. He paused on the porch, stretching his hamstrings, before securing his secure phone into his armband. He stepped off the porch, his rhythmic footfalls breaking the silence of the dawn as he began his run. As he rounded the long curve near the entrance of the subdivision, headlights cut through the low fog. A newly marked Fairfax County cruiser rolled slowly down the street. It wasn't the predatory, aggressive crawl of Fletcher's unit. It was a standard, steady patrol pace. The cruiser approached. Vance maintained his steady 140 beats per minute, his breathing perfectly controlled. He didn't look away, nor did he brace for a confrontation. As the car drew parallel to him, the driver, a sharp, young female officer who had recently transferred into the Reform District, rolled down her window. She didn't activate a spotlight. She didn't tap the siren. She simply looked at Vance, offered a respectful, deferential nod, and raised a hand in a polite wave. "Good morning, General," she called out over the quiet idle of the engine. "Good morning, officer," Vance replied, his voice calm, resonant, and strong. The cruiser continued down the avenue, its taillights fading into the morning mist as it turned the corner. Garrett Vance kept running, his stride long, fluid, and unbroken, the weight of justice resting comfortably on his shoulders as the sun finally broke over the Virginia horizon. This story is a powerful reminder that true stature isn't measured by a badge, a uniform, or the assumptions others make about you. It's defined by the quiet strength of your character and your unwavering resolve under pressure. General Vance could have met aggression with violence, matching the officer's petty tyranny on the asphalt. Instead, he chose a higher path. He leaned into the absolute discipline of his lifetime of service, allowing a corrupt system to unravel under the weight of its own arrogance. In a world where it feels increasingly easy to push back with anger, General Vance reminds us that the ultimate victory belongs to those who stand firm, stay calm, and let justice speak for itself. What did you take away from General Vance's unbreakable composure in that holding cell? Let's talk about it in the comments below. If stories of resilience, accountability, and systemic justice resonate with you, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your voice matters to us, and we'd love to have you along for the journey ahead.